Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Find a living in fisheries. The UAS Fisheries Technology Program offers online study from anywhere in Alaska, plus labs and workshops in many Alaska towns.
Is most likely a chum.
Find your living without leaving where you are. Fisheries Technology from UAS.
The National Weather Service.
And good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 9th of December, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather information. Watches, warnings, and advisories are easily found at weather.gov/Alaska. There are none right now, so great news there. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. And during the day, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. In the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing around 4 o'clock or so on NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks' YouTube channel. And later on in the evening, if you search for AKwx TV on the search bar on YouTube, you can watch this entire show from our broadcast partners here at Alaska Public Media. On Twitter, use the hashtag AKwx. That lets us know that you're talking about Alaska weather, no matter if it's a beautiful picture of Denali or somewhere out in the YK or up north on the Arctic slope. You can also tag any of the National Weather Service offices in Juneau, Fairbanks, or Anchorage, or NWS Alaska if you'd like everyone to see it. And of course, on Facebook, we like to share what we call our weather stories, telling you a little bit more of the in-depth and interesting information and climate tidbits about what's going on in the state. And right now, you'll find more information about what's going on in southeastern Alaska as your weather starts to dry up just a little bit more. Here's a look at the entire state, and you'll notice the big weather picture is really focused on this spinning cartwheel shape that we see in the Gulf of Alaska. But you'll notice at the end of the frame, there's also something else that's looming out across the southeastern part of this picture. A low pressure system has been filling in a little bit more in the Gulf, and most of the activity has been wrapping around the eastern side as is usual. The western side is pulling in drier air. The bubbling clouds that you see on the east are showers and sometimes even thunderstorms. Some of those have made their way up toward Yakutat this afternoon. You can see the progression of that as we go throughout the afternoon. But it's also making way for the next wave of low pressure to move up from the north and west. And this has been bringing rainfall to the Pacific Northwest. This will start to move its way northward as we head into Thursday night and into Friday. In the meantime, it looks like southeast will be sitting in some drier weather, a partly to mostly cloudy sky for many locations tomorrow, so good news there. Out across the interior, cold but dry weather moving off the continent from western Canada and into your backyard across the Yukon Valley. It's a pretty serious cold there, from temperatures anywhere from 10 to 20 below, in some cases even colder. Clouds return as you head into the Bering Strait, and as winds diminish across the Bering Strait, ice has been filling in, not just shore-fast ice, but higher concentrations of sea ice there, a little bit faster than what we were looking at this time last year. Around St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George, clouds passing through from time to time, and several waves of low pressure lined up across the Aleutians. We are in an active period, but the main core of that superhighway of weather is still just south and keeping most of our state out of reach of the really active rain and snow and wind makers for now, and keeping things pretty cold across most of the continental parts of our state. Here's a look at the loop one more time, and out across the west you can see clouds slowly creeping eastward. Haven't had a whole lot of activity to talk about as far as weather alerts go in the last couple days, so we'll jump right into our surface weather map. This is the area that we were watching for showers and thunderstorms yesterday. During the afternoon and evening yesterday, those were a little bit further south, and most of the activity has crept northward toward Yakutat in the northeastern Gulf this afternoon. Low pressure continues to sit right across the Alaska Range and the Chugach, and That's keeping some of the coldest air just to the north. We've got several waves of low pressure rotating around this in counterclockwise fashion, and each one of those kicks up a few more clouds, some occasional breezes, and from time to time a little bit of light snow. You can see some of that up across the northern Brooks Range, as well as the western tip of the Chukchi Seacoast out toward Point Hope and Point Ley and Wales and Tin City, as well as areas around Nunivak Island and Etoll and Strait, as well in the YK Delta there. There's another wave of low pressure just a little bit further west out toward Kiska and Attu. That's going to drop a little bit further south and kind of broaden its horizons a little bit into a longer area of low pressure. That should make a better chance for some snow showers there. Nothing too serious for the central or western chain. For southeast, you can see what's happening with that low and that big mass of clouds we saw blossoming there at the end of the satellite loop. This will be a 967 millibar low tonight, and the occlusion will stay south of Haida Gwaii, it looks like. There's still going to be some rain opportunities across the northern Gulf, but behind that should be some sinking air. That makes it a lot harder for clouds to bubble up with the air dropping down. So as we put a kind of squash on those clouds there, things will dry up a little bit more for the southern parts of southeast. There could still be some snow showers around Haines and Skagway, mainly in the mountains and northward. And around Prince William Sound, the higher terrain, and through the Kenai Peninsula. Watch for some snow showers around the hillsides and the mountains closer to Anchorage and the Talkeetnas as well. Generally, it looks like most areas will see some snow as we head into the early morning hours, but not too much to write home about. A look up north shows a clear sky for Thursday, generally along the Yukon Valley and northward toward the Brooks Range and even over the top toward Kaktovik by Thursday afternoon. The winds are light, and with a clear sky tonight and into early tomorrow, it is going to be another cold day. You'll see a few more clouds across the north slope as you get toward Barrow and Wainwright and westward. Now look for a few more clouds around Nome and out toward Wales. Kotzebue Sound should see some sunshine during the day. And the YK Delta may get a brief break as some of the clouds dry up, heading up over the Alaska Range with a few snow showers closer to the hills. On the western side, winds pick up a little bit more for St. Matthew and the Pribilofs to the west. Snow showers are possible again for the central and western chain. Rain and snow showers may fall around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, as well as the Alaska Peninsula heading into Friday. The system that drops a little bit further westward and inland toward Bristol Bay by Friday at 990 millibars will be the guiding force in our weather as we head toward the end of the week and the beginning of the weekend. Southeast right now looks to be fairly dry and more clouds than anything wet. Out across south central, rain and snow showers will be in the region. A better chance for snow across some of the higher terrain than at the lower elevations. Across the interior, a partly to mostly cloudy sky, some breaks in the clouds, but only as one wave passes, only to be followed by yet another one, probably a few hours away. It looks like blowing snow will be an issue for some of the passes up across the Brooks Range, and don't be surprised to see some flurries across the north slope. Across the west coast and the Seward Peninsula, snow showers will be possible for Norton Sound as the ice continues to fill in there. A north and westerly wind will be blustery at times across the Alaska Peninsula. Light snow is possible for your region. And once this next wave moves out of the way across the western Bering, there is a significantly stronger system coming into the Bering. And we're going to be watching to see how that shapes up during the rest of next week. So once again, if you're a western coast community or areas around the Aleutians, you'll want to be tracking the next system that'll come in probably early next week. It does look to be a fairly potential strong storm. It's a little too soon to tell exactly what impacts it may have or exactly how strong it might be. But if you're in the Bering, if you have friends in the Bering that are crabbing or doing any fishing along the Bering Sea coast, you'll want to keep close watch of the weather as we move into the weekend and start looking at early parts of next week. As we look at the temperature now for southeast, 30s and 40s are seen today with most areas around the outer coast in the lower to mid 40s. Ketchikan and Net, Craig and Klawock all looking at pleasant temperatures today as the air dried up a little bit more. Cake was looking at temperatures in the upper 30s it looked like today. 30s around Haines and Skagway and Juneau as well. Around Whitehorse and southern Yukon, temps are only in the teens, single digits, and considerably colder as you head toward the Alcan. 0 around Tok and Northway. South Central saw temps in the 20s and 30s. Around Prince William Sound, Valdez was only 21. Meanwhile, Cordova made it to 39. 20 in Anchorage, 30 in Homer, 32 in Seward, and Middleton Island held on to 41. The Matanuska Glacier was 0. Gulkana dropped to 5 below, and much colder temperatures up the Parks Highway, 4 below in Talkeetna, 9 below in Healy, 0 in Fort Greely, 7 below in Fairbanks today, and 1 below around Eagle. Now, northward of the Yukon Valley, the big cold, the Alaska cold settled in, and look at that, anywhere from 15 to 30 below from Anaktuvuk Pass out toward Ambler, anywhere from 15 to 33 below for Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse and Barrow and Atkasuk at 17 below, Kaktovik 18 below, Thankfully, the wind was not such a huge factor, at least by the observations. If you were out in it, I won't diminish anything you experienced today. Look for temperatures from 5 to 15 below around the north coast of Kotzebue Sound, 3 above, I should say, around Shishbrook. It makes a little difference. 0 in Nome, 11 below around Unalakleet. Galena was 15 below, 0 in Grayling, and many areas southward saw temps at least in the single digits. Bethel was 0 today, 10 in Nunivak Island, and 9 in Gamble and St. Lawrence. Bristol Bay temperatures saw single digits to about 20 around Dillingham earlier today. Cape Newenham was 22, 29 at St. Paul, just below freezing in St. George. You almost made it. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. False Pass was looking at temperatures around 41, 40 in Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and low to mid 30s for the central and western chain. Attu was 31. Overnight lows in southeast will make it into the mid to upper 30s. The warmest weather, of course, closer to the Dixon entrance. South central in the teens to 20s. A few places along the coast like Homer might hold on to 31. 34 in Kodiak, 20 for Cordova. And then northward of the Alaska Range, it gets much colder, anywhere from 15 to 30 below again. 33 in Bettles, 30 below in Arctic Village, 20 below for the Anaktuvuk Pass region, and 20 to 35 below for the Arctic coast, including Barrow and Prudhoe Bay. 10 below for Nome tomorrow. Looks like 5 below as you start your day in Bethel. Single digits and teens for most of Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula at or just below the freezing point, and lower 30s for most of the chain, even upper 20s out toward Attu. High temperatures tomorrow don't recover a whole lot there. Mid 30s for many. Southwest, you're looking at teens and 20s. Bethel about 1 below for a high temperature, and 2 below for Unalakleet. 3 above in Nome, 12 below for Barrow. Prudhoe Bay holding on to temps around 22 below tomorrow. So again, be extra careful there. Mid 20s to lower 30s for the Parks Highway down the road system toward Anchorage, Homer, Seward. Prince William Sound looking at mid 30s for many. Gulkana 9 and upper 30s and lower 40s for southeast. And again, you should see a little more sunshine tomorrow. Look for pockets of MVFR across the upper Yukon Valley, across the northwestern Chukchi Seacoast, all the way through the Bering Strait. A little bit of IFR just east of the Pribilofs there, so watch for that. And MVFR conditions into Bristol Bay, but most of the interior, most of Prince William Sound, most of Cook Inlet, and really most of Kodiak Island should be looking at VFR conditions through at least part of your day. Now, here's your pass conditions. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass expected to be VFR through most of the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, marginal conditions there to start, with improvements had there. And Rainy Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule through most of your Thursday. Windy Pass looks okay at this point. Isabel Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions to start your Thursday, with improvements had there. And the same goes for Mentasta Pass, but your start could be a little worse, holding around IFR to start at daybreak, moving toward midday. Tanita Pass, MVFR conditions to start your Thursday. Portage Pass looks marginal through most of the day, especially in the western side. And then Chilkoot and White Pass, marginal conditions there, with VFR expected to take shape and hold through the afternoon. Surface freezing lines haven't changed much yesterday. No new news to tell you about here. You can see the 2,000 to 4,000 foot freezing levels holding over the eastern part of the Gulf. Maybe a little bit of warmer air nudging in toward Seward and Homer and Kodiak Island at 2,000 feet. Icing potential is above 3,000 to below 8,000 for most of southeast. There is still some moisture moving through the region there. We'll watch a little bit more carefully around Prince William Sound on the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula, and below 9,000 feet west of St. Matthew. Any flights around that region probably running to a little more isolated moderate from time to time. Other than that, the bulk of the moisture is across the east. The bulk of the weather following the superhighway here at the jet stream around 30,000 feet. Wind speeds up to 150 to 160 knots along this fast-moving river of air. Now, across the continent and most of Alaska, you can see a kind of a southwest to easterly flow, about 55 to 60 knots. This is allowing those minor disturbances to roll through. But if this were to buckle northward just a little bit more, the weather would become significantly more active and powerful for that matter. And that's what we're watching a little bit more as we head into next week. At 9,000 feet, you can see low pressure here across the Pacific Northwest, across the Western Gulf, across the Eastern Bering, and across the Western Bering. Another circulation across the Arctic coast with a broad westerly flow moving across the Brooks Range at 20 to 40 knots. You can see the impact of the jet stream starting to grab into this level a little bit there, with wind speeds from 25 to 35 knots, a little bit stronger south of the Gulf, but we have more of an offshore flow across southeastern Alaska. Light moderate winds there across the interior at 15 to 20, and light winds cutting into the YK Delta at about 10 to 15 knots. So really not a very organized fashion of wind flow across the region. Now at 3,000 feet, you get a much more of an impact from the east and southeasterly winds. These are still fairly light cutting across the Alaska range, but they do pick up as they move across the west coast and start to see more of a dominant northerly flow through the Bering Strait and over the Pribilofs at about 30 to 35 knots. A northwesterly flow continues for the central and eastern Aleutians in the Alaska Peninsula, light southerlies across the south central coastline. And again, there's our north and easterly offshore winds blowing through southeastern Alaska at about 20 to 25. Turbulence, we'll watch for a little bit of chop across the Dixon Entrance, generally below 5,000 feet. It might extend as far north as Sitka. Chances are that should diminish throughout the day. A little bit of chop around Prudhoe Bay tomorrow. Winds should pick up there just a little bit. And then around the Killbucks and the northern parts of the YK, look for areas below 5,000 feet for some chop there. And through the Barren Islands and Shelikof Strait region, below 4,000 feet, you might run into a little bit of shake. Around the central and eastern chain, as well as the Alaska Peninsula to Sand Point, again, there could be some isolated moderate from time to time. Nothing too out of the ordinary there. Let's look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with an update on Alaska's sea ice edge as well as your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest this evening is Bill Compton. Bill's been on the program before. He's a CFI and ATP, and I've got to tell you, I've found him to be one of the most knowledgeable people on fuel management and long-distance flights in GA aircraft. Bill admits to watching too many fly-in movies as a kid, which resulted in a lifelong fascination with airplanes. Bill had his private by 16 and he was CFI by 19. He's owned a lot of great airplanes, including a Cessna 180, Bonanzas, Barons, and currently a turbocharged Bonanza. Bill, welcome to Hangar Flying.
Well, thank you, Harry.
Nice to have you back on. I mentioned that, in my opinion, you're one of the most knowledgeable people I've met on flight planning, precise flight planning, and fuel management. Let's begin by you telling the audience about your long distance over water experience. What kind of flights have you done?
Well, back in the early 70s, I had a Bonanza with tip tanks, and it was a good long-range aircraft. I did non-stops down to Seattle area. Then I saw an ad for a cabin tank that would fit in a Bonanza, 110 gallons. And I thought, oh, if I had that, I could go to Hawaii. And so I picked it up, and I've had it ever since, and that's enabled my flights. And I learned AstroNav and navigated with that. And by that time, I had an ATP, and I was so impressed with that. I thought, I must know everything about this, and I just went. And I learned how little I really did know. And gradually, over many oceanics, I've gradually figured out the things that I'm here to talk about.
So, AstroNav, so that was before GPS then, huh?
Oh yeah, 75, yes.
Wow.
That's my first oceanic.
I'll bet GPS does come in handy now, though, huh?
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, we'll talk a little bit about how you flight plan.
Well, for a long-range trip, I have all the numbers planned out for the aircraft I fly. If I'm taking off at 3,800 pounds, I know that I'm going to climb to my cruise altitude and set power for the indicated airspeed that I want to fly for the first 33 gallons of fuel. And when my totalizer shows that I'm down 33 gallons, which is 200 pounds, then I decrease my airspeed by about 3 knots. And throughout the flight, as the fuel burns off and the airplane gets lighter, I gradually slow down. But as I slow down, I get more and more air miles per gallon. And air miles per gallon is really what it's all about. And I realize, and what's been known for a long time, that your nautical air miles per gallon is dependent on the indicated airspeed that you fly, your weight, aircraft weight, and your center of gravity location.
So let me interrupt you. With your airplane, 3,800 pounds, you take off, climb to altitude. What would be your typical airspeed you start out with?
Oh, indicated airspeed might be 140, and gradually down to about 125 by the end of the trip.
What about trade-offs? What are some of your considerations? I mean, there may be a situation where flying slower would give you better range, but it's impractical. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Absolute maximum range is gotten at the point where your angle of attack of the airplane flying through the air is such the drag of the lift that you're using is equal to the drag of what's called parasite drag, the friction against the airframe. And that'll give the best miles per gallon. However, it's far from perfect because the airplane's too slow. The fuel flow for that regimen in my airplane anyway is way below the fuel flow that the engine would be happy with. So what I do is take LD max and the airspeed for that, and I increase it by 16%, knowing that my miles per gallon penalty will be 4%. And then I maintain that balance between the two factors, and that allows me to maintain a constant angle of attack for the whole flight.
Bill, we've run out of time. What I'd like to do is get you back next time, and probably a couple of times, and let's start out that session with explaining a little bit about L over D max, which maybe some of our pilots out there haven't talked about since they were getting their license. But let's do that. Thanks for being on the program tonight, and folks, hope you enjoyed the program. Look forward to seeing Bill next time and continuing the discussion.
Thanks again, Harry. Here's a look at today's sea ice edge, and as you notice, Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, and areas along the YK coast have filled in with some pretty higher concentration areas there. Above 80% is what we're coloring in white. The blue shaded areas, about 20 to 80%, and around St. Lawrence Island and right along the fringe of the white there, you can see the ice is growing and now southward from the Bering Strait and outward from the coast. More to come for Bristol Bay as well. Right now, not too much expected to change around Cook Inland if you're tracking the northern sections there. Here's a look at the marine forecast now for southeastern Alaska. Winds will remain around 20 to 25 knots there on the inside, about 5 to 6 foot seas expected with the north and northeasterly flow. Still watching for the threat for some isolated thunderstorms tomorrow, mainly north of Cross Sound to Yakutat. 20 knots from the south and east, and offshore wind will strengthen tomorrow at 20 knots from Sitka southward toward the Dixon entrance, with 14-foot seas expected on Thursday. For Friday, light onshore flow around 15 knots there from Sitka south. A south and southeasterly flow continues from Gustavus north toward Yakutat. On the inside, 15 to 25 knots, the strongest of which up around the Lynn Canal, with 5-foot seas there and 3 to 4 foot seas around some of the central and southern inner coastlines. As you head across south central, light winds in the northern parts of the Cook Inlet. Southward, the northeasterly winds pick up to about 25 to 30 knots with 4 to 9 foot seas there south of Calgan Island. You can see 6 foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, and easterly flow crossing the north and western Gulf at 30 knots with 14 to 15 foot seas, and northwesterlies coming off of Kodiak Island at 25 knots. Those pick up to 30 knots from the west tomorrow. Southerlies develop as we get into Friday. 25 to 30 knots there across the northern Gulf. Easterlies strengthen inside of Prince William Sound. Northerlies pick up across Cook Inlet, 20 to 25. Northwesterlies west of the Barrens at 25 knots, 30 knots to the east, and 8 to 12 foot seas around the Barren Islands, with westerlies inside of Shelikof Strait also at 20 knots. Northeasterlies will continue for the Bristol Bay region at 20 knots with a 3-foot sea. Westerlies for all the other areas at 25 to 30 knots, 11 to 12 foot seas in the Pacific and 8-foot seas on the northern side of the Alaska Peninsula. Watch for freezing spray downwind of the ice edge, of course. That threat continues into Friday with westerlies at 25 to 30 across the Bering and 25 to 30 for the North Pacific, with 10 to 11 foot seas there as we head through Friday afternoon. For the Aleutians, in the central and the east, a west and northwesterly flow about 20 to 30 knots. Look for 9-foot seas across the Bering Sea coast, 9 to 11-foot seas across the Pacific, and more of a light and variable flow from Kiska to Adak. A little bit more of a westerly flow developing there from Kiska to Attu at 15 knots with a 9-foot sea. And you'll see those turn a little bit more to the north and west as we get into Friday. Meanwhile, a south and southwesterly flow picks up for Adak and Atka all the way to Nikolsky with 20 to 30 knots on the Bering Sea coast and 20 to 30 also for the Pacific with 7 to 9-foot seas there. For the west coast, it's a northeasterly flow coming off the cold continent, so watch for freezing spray again near the ice edge, 25 to 30 knots with 6 to 8-foot seas, 4-foot seas outside of the Kuskokwim Delta, and 9-foot seas from St. Matthew to the Pribilofs with a 25 to 30 knot wind, more from a northerly direction. For Friday, not a whole lot of a change, more of a northerly shift in the northern half of the Bering with seas still ranging around 9 to 11 feet. This should be 11 feet here. Don't worry about that, St. Matthew. And also some stronger winds there starting to shape up for the Pribilofs. 30 knots are expected there. A south and westerly flow from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, 15 knots with light northerlies from Barrow down toward Wainwright. Also look for northerlies from Cape Lisburne down toward Shishmaref. Again, a little bit of an onshore flow there, but with the ice in place, that shouldn't cause too many problems. 15 to 20 knots expected there for Thursday. Northeasterlies pick up from Cape Lisburne over Kotzebue Sound at 25 knots there for Friday. Northwesterlies around Barrow and a southwesterly offshore and light flow from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. Look for a 10-knot wind there for Friday, again over the ice pack. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. Low pressure is still sitting and spinning just east of Kodiak Island at 978 millibars. This is sloshing moisture up and over the Chugach. Don't be surprised to see some snow showers around the Anchorage area as well as the Seward and Parks Highway tonight. Look for a light rainfall across Prince William Sound with low pressure strengthening just west and north of the Pacific Northwest. This is moving northward, but so is drier air, and it looks like southeast may have a little more glimpse of the sunshine tomorrow with a partly to mostly cloudy sky for you as a result. Look for pockets of rain and snow hovering across the north and western coast and Kodiak Island tomorrow. Dry conditions to start the day north of the Yukon, but also a very cold start, 20 to 30 below in many cases. There's snow showers continue for the Aleutians as well as the Pribilofs and St. Matthew. No weather alerts are posted at this time, but the weather is changing as we head into the end of the weekend and early next week. So once again, Bering Sea Coast and Aleutian communities, stay up to date on your weather. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Indie Alaska is a groundbreaking series that dives into the lives of people living in the last frontier. Each episode introduces you to colorful characters from around the state. Funding for Indie Alaska is provided in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company. Catch the latest episodes at alaskapublic.org.